Very good, Sarah. Thanks for running the show for us up to this point. Ladies and gentlemen, we are right at the top of the hour. I see people are coming into the room here as we get ready for our presentation, and a huge welcome to Dean and Dr. Phil Nelson, great friend. You can see him with the Western University Health Sciences logo there behind him. So this is the fifth and the last one of our full series of presentations on race and representation, and it's just been an outstanding program, and I know today will be a great capstone, not only a part of this series, but the 2020 North Carolina State College of Veterinary Medicine Distinguished Alumni Lecturer. It's a delight to recognize Dr. Nelson with that honor, and he will be presented with that in a virtual ceremony. Everything's virtual these days, a week from now. So as I said, our speaker is Dr. Philip Nelson. He's a DVM and a PhD. And I'm going to guess he may well mention the different places he's graduated from in greater detail. But I want to recognize his DVM degree, of course, from Tuskegee. And importantly, for us today, his PhD that he was awarded in 1993 at NC State, the College of Veterinary Medicine. Phil has done many, many things in his life, and most importantly to me, he's helped my education and my understanding of issues around diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. And we've had many opportunities to explore some of these topics, and it's always been rewarding. He was an outstanding president and leader of the Association of American Veterinary Medical Colleges from 2017 to 2018. He's also received an alumni awards from Tuskegee. He got the 2016 Senator John Melcher DVM Leadership in Public Policy Award. He received the John Payne Industry Award from Banfield in 2012, and one I know he will be particularly proud of, the Norden Distinguished Teacher Award in Tuskegee, even before he came here to get his PhD. Phil, you are so welcome. I'm handing it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate this. And before I get into the program, here's the award. I got it virtually. I don't know if you can see this with my virtual background or anything, but thank you so much for this award. It means a lot. At the ceremony, I'll tell you more about what it means. I've already taped it, and I can't remember what I said, but it is deeply appreciated. Paul, I do appreciate the fact that you invited me, and I want to commend you and the college for what you're doing. I've gotten a chance to see all of the presentations, either as they were delivered or afterwards. And I have to tell you, being the cleanup hitter here makes it a little challenging after seeing the dynamic presentation that you've already had. Dr. Thielen essentially established the legacies of land-grant universities with a unusual sense of humor. Mr. Fields Jackson talked about diversity and the justification from a business perspective. Tracy Hanner, I love the way he introduced himself in the first talk of the series on HBCU institutions. And even though the title of my topic was personal reflections on HBCU institutions, I'm not going to do a lot of repetition of what he did because he covered it so well. But I love the way he introduced himself as the first American of African descent to graduate from North Carolina State. That so eloquently puts or presents the difference between looking at people as a part of a race, as opposed to being a part of the human race, or as opposed to being part of the nation. I am an American that just happens to be of African descent. So, but obviously last week, who can top Dr. Perry, Dr. Ruby Perry, and what she presented? But the key themes that she presented was intentionality and commitment. This series of talks clearly demonstrates your intentionality and your commitment. But after I looked at all of those topics, I kept thinking, there's nothing else to talk about except what nobody wants to talk about. And that is the personal effect that racism has on the recipients of those practices, of those feelings. And there's a reason why nobody wants to talk about it. I am doing a series of podcasts with Dr. Peter Weinstein after I received a phone call back in June, right after George Floyd's murder. And one of the things that he said was, Phil, I apologize for not talking to you about this before. I've had years of opportunities, and I don't know why I haven't asked you these tough questions before. And my response was, I don't want to talk about it either. I became a veterinarian because I was interested in veterinary medicine, but we can't separate. George Floyd's death essentially forced us to face the fact that we can't separate our relationships from our careers. We can't separate the problems we have as a society and be myopic and just come to work as if it has no impact on our ability to contribute to society or to do our jobs. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. But before we do that, I want to show you a little video that I created to focus on my perspective of the history of race in our profession. And I thought it was better that I do it as a video rather than riff it. So if you bear with me for a moment, and I'm going to try to share my screen. And let's hope this works.
We cannot address the issue of race in veterinary medicine in America without addressing the issue and the treatment of race and race relations in American society. Our biases, preconceptions, and subsequent actions regarding race and race relations in our profession and communities are interdependent. In the 1600s, all of Europe was abuzz by the prospect of new land. It led to an era of discovery and conquest, and ultimately the establishment of a new nation, largely based on an agrarian society. Britain, France, and Spain exported their explorers, their criminals, their warriors, and their persecuted, all looking for a better life. They brought with them their horses, other animals, their experiences, and their tolerance and dependency on indentured servants and slaves. Forging of an early agrarian society was largely successful because of cheap labor through the judicious use of indentured servants, slaves, and animals. The support and care of each was good business, and for all practical purposes, inseparable. It is reported that Charles Clark was the first veterinarian in the States when he set up practice on the East Coast in 1817. America at the time, because of England's influence, promoted the cure or kill approach to medicine, and the byword of the day was traditional cures and the art of medicine. It is not so difficult to describe the cultural ethos of society during this time. Slavery had a firm hold on our society as the underpinning of our agricultural business model and became the center of a national debate, resulting in a civil war approximately 40 years later. Aside from the monumental development of the end of slavery after the war and the brief decade of integration and inclusion during Reconstruction, there wasn't much difference in veterinary medicine or the cultural ethos pre- and post-Civil War. There is nothing to discuss regarding race relations within the profession in the 19th century. They were all white until 1897. August Nathaniel Lushington became the first African American to earn the VMD degree at the University of Pennsylvania in 1897. Dr. John Brown received a DM degree from Kansas State University at the end of the first decade of the 20th century. In 2012, he became the Director of Agricultural Instruction at Tuskegee Institute, initiating a fruitful collaboration between Tuskegee and Kansas State for years to come. In 1910, Dr. Bias became the first African-American male to graduate from the Ohio State University College of Veterinary Medicine. Upon graduation, he returned to the South to pursue a veterinary position at today's Tuskegee University. Established on July 4th, 1881 by Booker T. Washington, the private and historically Black university is located in Tuskegee, Alabama, and was home to George Washington Carver, who taught there for 47 years and served as head of its agriculture department. In addition, the school is the alma mater of the World War II African-American military pilots, the Tuskegee Airmen. Dr. Frederick Patterson earned his DVM degree from Iowa State College in 1923 and an MS degree in 1927 and a PhD degree from Cornell University in 1932. He became the third president of Tuskegee Institute in 1935 and established the United Negro College Fund and the School of Veterinary Medicine in 1944. He coined the phrase, "A mind is a terrible thing to waste." In 1987, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. While African Americans began to make minimal forays into the profession, the basis of the healthcare being delivered by the profession was also changing. When a hog cholera epidemic hit the Ohio Valley in 1863, the nation began to come to the realization that veterinary medicine just might be important in protecting the country's food supply, as well as their proper role in improving the public health. By the 20th century, veterinary professionals recognized that the tried and true traditions were a poor response to this crisis, and germ theory became the underpinning theory of medicine and was fully entrenched by the mid-20th century. Despite these cracks in the education barriers of America, the social ethos of the first half of the 20th century that largely affected the African American community was characterized by Jim Crow laws, peonage, segregation, lynching, redlining, and domestic terrorism in many areas of the country. In the 1950s, the African American population began to effectively organize and mobilize a national civil rights movement. It resulted in the passing of the Civil Rights Acts of 1957 and 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. America's cultural ethos was changing. Legislation was beginning to align legal protections with the rights defined in the Constitution for all of society. You can't legislate hearts. It seems that laws are easier to change than attitudes. There was, and still is, considerable active resistance to the spirit and letter of the aforementioned legislative acts, causing obfuscation and impairing the correction of the corrosive and cumulative effects of racial bias. Cultural change on the issue of racism has moved at a glacial pace within the veterinary profession. In the 1980s, the veterinary profession was described as the whitest of all the professions. By 1980, despite significant advances for Blacks in all other areas of science and medicine, the veterinary profession was less than 1% Black. Collectively, we have been able to move the needle just a little. The applicant pool to veterinary colleges was 2% Black in the 80s and 90s, and is now 4% Black. However, Blacks make up 11% of the nation's population. The reasons for this disparity are multifactorial and complex. Overt, covert racism, lack of equity access to quality K through 12 education, lack of equity access to affordable housing, the industrial prison complex, the 13th Amendment and subsequent legal manipulations, and many, many more. In order to solve a problem, you must understand the problem. It is our hope that this brief review of our history helps us understand how we got here. The rest of the evening, we hope our special guests will further elucidate the withering impact our history has on real people, in the hope that it expands your perspective on the pernicious nature of racism. Our profession is a microcosm of our society. The origins of our profession is inextricably integrated in the developing fabric of our agrarian segment of American society. The attitudes of the majority and the racial policies of the nation and its leaders are the major obstacles to addressing these inequities. Resolving racism within our profession will require the members of our profession to resolve to become active in tackling the larger problems of our society. Pick one, I'll pick another. Together, we can get this done. Thank you for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest.
So I hope you enjoyed that video. It was shared in a webinar that we had on anti-racism in our college. I want to take this opportunity first to talk a little bit about myself. And don't tell anybody, please just keep whatever I'm about to say a secret. Otherwise, I won't be able to share. My father was director of food service at Jackson State University. And we moved to Mississippi in 1960 when I was 5 or 6 years old. So I grew up on an HBCU campus. You might say that I was preordained to be in education because my father was my best friend because he said I was his. So I thought we should at least reciprocate. But he came home every day talking about the relationship that as a staff person he had with faculty. And I learned a lot about higher education and relationships through those talks. I didn't understand that I was being imprinted in education. But by the time I was old enough to go to college, I had received a half scholarship to Yale and a half scholarship to Harvard. But my father's family we were in the upper level of the poor class. And he wasn't sure that if he could support the other half. And I wasn't sure if I could work and be successful at Yale and or Harvard. Now, I went to a segregated school until my 9th grade. And during that time, I received a lot of support. But in the 9th grade, when I went to an integrated school where no one really wanted me, I lost the benefit of counselors. The counselors always thought that my opportunities were a lot less than the opportunities I wanted to take. And when I informed them that I wanted to be a veterinarian, it didn't matter how well my grades were. I was always redirected to other areas like mechanic. I decided to apply to vet school, but I had to go to undergrad first. And I chose to go to Jackson State for economic reasons, primarily, because of a lack of confidence, because of having been raised in a segregated society where I was always reminded that I might not be good enough. And therefore, the doubt that I had about surviving a Yale or Harvard education, having to worry about money. So one day, as I was walking across the Jackson State campus, I passed the library and realized that there was no way I was going to learn all the knowledge in that library in 4 years, and that it was up to me to learn it. And so a 17-year-old young man, developing young man, decided on his own, I'm going to go to Jackson State and eschew the other opportunities so that I don't have to embarrass my father and so that I don't have to take the risk of failing at a premier institution and make my race look bad. These are the kinds of thoughts that a pernicious environment can instill in a person, and these that can affect decision making. And when you don't have a person to talk to, then there's no way to unravel some of the untold, unexpected twists your mind may make. I finished 2 years of Jackson State and knew that Tuskegee would take individuals after 2 years of preparation. There were 2 other colleges in the nation that would also take veterinary applicants after 2 years of applications. I had very good grades, so I applied to all 3 of those institutions. Of course, the other 2 were predominantly white. About a month after I applied, I received a phone call from one of the institutions. It was a staff member who said, I need to talk to Philip Nelson. And I said, this is he. And her response was, Philip, we got your application. I just want to make sure of something. Are you Negroid? And after I got over my shock, I said, yes, I'm African American. I thought so. Did you know that there's a school for you and your kind? And after a little shock, I said, no, which school would that be? And she said, Tuskegee. You should go there because we won't be accepting you here. But you have good grades, and I don't want you to waste your time waiting on us to invite you. She thanked me for being pleasant, and we hung up. Now, I don't regret going to Tuskegee. Tuskegee is what I had some of the best experiences I've ever had at Tuskegee. And I got the nurturing that I needed at Tuskegee. And I got the mentoring that I needed at Tuskegee. I am proud to be a Tuskegee alum. But these are the kinds of constant challenges that racism presents that causes a weathering effect. It's the same as the wind blowing against the rocks for eons. There's no wonder that there are health disparities that significantly affect people of color. It is not just medical. It is also psychological. So I went to Tuskegee. graduated from Tuskegee and then went to Mississippi State. Graduated from Tuskegee, and my intention was to practice in my hometown in Jackson, Mississippi. But Mississippi State was starting a new school the year before I graduated. And the veterinarian that I was going to work for recommended to the new dean, to the founding dean, that he contact me and consider me as one of the founding faculty. Now I have to tell you, I thought I had lost my job when the dean contacted me. And I was a little concerned about what was really happening here. But after interviewing at Mississippi State, I became enamored with the new experiment that they were trying. And I recognized that it was probably the only time I was going to get a chance to see the establishment of a new veterinary school. Little did I know. But I ended up joining Mississippi State, and I had a wonderful time in Mississippi State in the veterinary college. Living in the community was something different. But we can talk about that later. I'm cognizant of your time, and I need to get through the rest of the life that we need to talk about. So I taught at Mississippi State for a while, did a residency in internal medicine, ended up returning to Tuskegee because of my commitment to Tuskegee and wanting to give back to Tuskegee. And then I realized that I was never going to practice in private practice, that I was committed. I enjoyed academia. And at the time, board certification was just starting, and there was actually a discussion within the profession as to whether you should have whether PhD was better or board certification was better. There weren't a lot of boarded people during that time. And I didn't need another question about my competence. And so I decided to get a PhD. And I interviewed at Cornell and North Carolina State and one other college. And I was fortunate to be taken into the lab of Dr. Marion Wayne Tompkins. And I received a PhD in immunology. Now, I'm going to tell you something here that probably no one else will tell you. But I hope it gives you some insight on the differences in perspective of the students that and people of color that may be in your culture, in your community now. Of course, my experiences on campus were challenging. I expected that. And I had been teaching for about 8 years before I decided to get a PhD. So many of the faculty were actually colleagues of mine until I became a student, a graduate student. And that was a strange change in relationship. But within the college, my experiences were, I would describe, pleasant. Outside of the college, in the community, was another story. One of the challenges I had was I had 2 children and a wife who was supporting me, helping support the family. I had to take a pay cut to come and get my PhD. One of the ironies of raising children in North Carolina, coming from Alabama, was I was looking forward to enrolling my children in what was then considered the best school system in the nation. North Carolina was investing $1.6 billion in new schools. I bought a home in Hedingham, in a suburb called Hedingham community, a golf community. And then discovered that my children were being bused to an inner city school to integrate the inner city school because the predominant culture of that community was white. And I also learned after arriving in North Carolina that North Carolinians were fighting for more money for public education because they thought that North Carolina had the worst school system in the nation. I have to tell you, I felt like maybe I had contributed to that because every state I've lived in, Mississippi, Alabama, and now North Carolina, always had the worst school system in the nation. I became president of PTA and learned a lot from that. But one day I came home and my wife was washing her dishes. And I noticed that in about 15 minutes, she had broken 3 of them. And I said, "What is the problem?" And she said, "I just got a note from Brian's teacher, and they want to put him in special ed. They want him tested for special ed." And I said, "Are you kidding? As bright as Brian is?" And she said, "I know. What are you going to do about it?" I said, "We're going to take him and let him get tested. I want to see how this works." And she was pretty angry at me. And I said, "No, I want to test the system." Now, there was a practice called tracking that usually focused on minority children, and particularly minority males, that and in public education that would track them out of normal educational opportunities. And I was suspicious that that is what was happening here. My wife was certain. And so we took our son to the educational psychologist. They tested him. And 2 days later, the principal called me into the office and said, "We need to put Brian in the gifted program." And she apologized to me for the embarrassment and for the shame I must have felt. And I just told her I only felt anger. I felt anger for the people who did not have, for the young people of color in her school that did not have active parent involvement. It was because of those kinds of challenges that, honestly, my experiences while I was in graduate school at North Carolina was lonely. I lived in a predominantly white community, and I only knew one of my neighbors. Now, that could have been because I was in the lab a lot, and because Wayne and Mary Tompkins drove me crazy, requiring experiments at 4 o'clock in the morning. And it could not have been because of that. I have a mixture of feelings when I think about my time in Raleigh. And unfortunately, that mixture is related to race relations. So what can we do about this? We must first seek to understand not just the topic or the issue. We need to seek to understand each other. I am particularly cognizant of the day and the environment that I'm giving this speech. This nation is polarized. And it's polarized because we haven't decided to visit each other across the fence. And we've developed so many fences between our neighbors. We must recognize and acknowledge the obstacles that have divided us, that have imprisoned us, that has diminished us. And then we have to commit to changing that status quo for the better, for our children, for our grandchildren. And it starts with the recognition that passive acceptance of egregious wrongs is tantamount to support. We're on this road together. I too have a lot to learn, even with all this white hair. It's time for a real conversation at the grassroots level in your local communities. Real change requires real talk. We would like to think that this is just the beginning. George Floyd forced us to focus on anti-Black racism. I'm aware that there are other forms of social injustice. But I am a victim of this one. You know, a few days ago, I bought an electric toothbrush. And I looked on the, and if you push the button once, you get a clean setting. You push the button twice, you get gum care. You push it 3 times and you get sensitive. And then you push it again and you get deep clean. You'd think clean would be good enough. But we're raised with, Americans are spoiled with options. And yet, when it comes to equality, when it comes to being a human being, there are no options. The Preamble to the Constitution says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Unalienable rights means that no one has the right to determine whether I'm human or not. These rights can't be severed by laws, feelings, or prejudice, governmental shenanigans, presidential edicts, or even individual actions. They are absolute, universal, and pervasive. They are not optional. So what do we do? Dr. Hanner suggested that white folks need to talk about this a little more. I suggest that all folks need to talk about this a little more. And that we need to talk with each other. I have just as much to learn from you as you have to learn from me. And I, because of my color, am not the expert in diversity. I am the expert in my own experiences, just as you are. It is, if we are going to save this nation, then we're going to have to recognize that we cannot compartmentalize social justice from business. We cannot compartmentalize our profession from interracial relations, from gender identity, from any other issue that we need to raise. And so, if there were one word I would use, it would be patience with each other. Patience with our own ineptitudes, a willingness to listen to each other without recrimination. We have to start somewhere. We have to learn to converse rather than to defend our position. We have the nasty habit of defending our position rather than explaining our position. We start our conversations with a defense, forcing the other conversationalist to defend their position. We all want the same thing: the opportunity to determine our own happiness. But it is a myth to think that I can determine my happiness without your cooperation. And our society has proven that we can be even more happy with collaboration. But we poison our efforts when we seek to achieve that happiness on the backs of others. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to speak. I also want to thank you again for the recognition as a distinguished alumnus. And I want to repeat that I am genuinely honored by that recognition. But I am more touched by the attempt that you're making to improve our society through relationships. Thank you for listening.
Phil, thank you. That was a wonderful speech. It felt deeply personal. I think in that way, it had a lot in common with Dr. Hanna's speech at the beginning, because his personal experience drove so much of what he had to say. I feel yours was even stronger in that regard. It really is an honor for us to have you as our distinguished alumni. I've had the opportunity over the years since I've had this job to see the respect there is for you across this nation and the world of veterinary medicine. And that respect is because of your contributions, your intellect, and your insight. It is not tokenism. It is a genuine respect for you as a great veterinary scientist. I don't want to lay this on too thick and embarrass you, but I hope you know that I mean this sincerely. I really hope people will submit some questions, or if you want to just step in and ask a question. We're a fairly small community here on the call. I think we've got over 20 people watching on YouTube and around 60 here on Zoom. I do have a question for you, one that you talked about the anger you experienced at different times, and I'm sure you've had many emotions, and you advocated for patients. This is, I suppose, a bit of a dean-to-dean question. We're in a time of turmoil. I am worried for my students and for others in our vet school community who are activists, who are genuine in their intent and honest, and want to get out and make a difference at a time of threat. What has given us Black Lives Matter. I mean, how do you counsel particularly young people, be they vet students or others, about making a difference and quite frankly, keeping themselves safe?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Well, it's a tough one for me because, I snuck off from my home when the Freedom Riders came through Jackson, Mississippi. I understand the fervor. I understand, and I actually applaud those. There is a need. My quest for patience is not synonymous to a plea for inactivity. My advice to those who are willing to contribute to the protests constructively is to be careful, not to withhold. However, there are times in everyone's life when you have to focus on yourself in order to improve yourself so that you can provide even more to society. And so you have to be not just careful for your personal safety, but you have to be careful about risking your professional accomplishments. And there will always be opportunities to participate in some form of protest. So it is complicated, but I also tend to mentor toward advocacy, toward active advocacy, and so it's just a matter of making sure that my father used to tell me a story about they used to farm in Alabama. They used to farm on an island in the middle of a river, and had to take a barge across. And they would take this mule down to the barge. And his father would always say, "And boy, don't run that mule. And so one day, my father was about 16 years of age, and his father told him, take the mule down to the barn, she'll be there in a minute. And he said, and don't run that mule. And my dad said, he responded, Dad, you've told me this for years. I'm not going to run the mule. He said, why do you keep telling me that? He said, let me ask you a question. If I've told you this for years, have you ever run the mule? And my dad said, well, yeah, I guess I have. He said, see, I knew you had, but you didn't kill your fool self because you knew I would have caught you. You have to put some fences around in order for them to understand that the danger.
Thank you. We have a few questions. Now, one of these you may have addressed a little bit in what you just said, but from Bob Sherry, who's one of our department heads here. I understand we need patience, but how do we ensure it does not deteriorate to complacence?
Yes. And again, patience is, when I'm invoking patience, I'm invoking patience with my own anger. I'm trying to invoke patience with my own intolerance or my own focus on getting my point across. That's totally different than being involved. That's totally different than being engaged. That's totally different than being detached from the problem. If you stay engaged, it's difficult to ignore the problem.
Thank you. And here is the question basically of this whole series of 5 talks, because it's the question that was asked at the beginning and frankly led to many of them. It's from Dr. Laura Nelson. How should veterinary curricula incorporate awareness of the history of our profession and society so that we and our graduates can better serve our community? How do we, in our veterinary curricula, address the issues that, in all honesty, have been the focus of this series of presentations?
Well, I think you do it by making the veterinary curricula with regards to diversity and equity personal. You know, many colleges have challenges. I mentioned in the video that as hard as I've been working for the last 30 years, we still only have 4% of our applicant pool being African-American. And I'm disappointed by that. I almost feel guilty by that. I feel as if I've been railing against, I've almost failed. But you have to recognize that it's not necessarily, or it's not solely the veterinary community fault. There are bigger issues we have to address. And if we should feel guilty about it, it's because we are not addressing those bigger issues. And so making sure that our graduates understand those issues helps guarantee that we will continue to erode the obstacles. But also making sure that whoever we have in our classrooms, that we understand where they come from and that they understand where the veterinary profession came from and that it relates to the communities they're likely to go back to. That's what I mean by making it personal. Maybe I should say making it relevant. That may be better phrased. But there is no pedagogical curriculum approach here. This is about improving our society. This is about understanding the role of the veterinarian in society, down to the relationships that we have to maintain and serve as a veterinarian.
Well, the next question really builds on this, and it comes from Dr. Alan Kennedy, who you know really well, I know, and in all truth, I think it is he who first suggested your name for this award. So from Alan, what has been the most effective thing done at your college to address diversity and inclusion needs?
Oh, well, okay. It depends on what the need is. You know, there's a difference between the difference between diversity and inclusion is diversity tends to be the numbers. You know, how many of this demographic do you have? How many of that demographic do you have? And our admissions process was probably the greatest, was the most effective in that we have a two-stage process where we look for quality first. And once you get to that stage, then we select the class for diversity. We intentionally select for diversity, trying to mimic the face of America through our class, with the face of our classes. We're not always able to do it, but we've been the most successful at that. But the needs of the people are different. Once you have that class, you're now committed to making sure that you're supporting the needs of the people. And I hope the stories that I told you today illustrates that you need to care about your students when they go home. You need to understand that the environments that they may be going to while they're studying. You need to, you know, and the difference between inviting them in to achieve diversity is like inviting someone to the party, but then asking them to dance is inclusion. Inviting someone to a birthday party might be considered diversity. Giving a birthday party for them is inclusion.
Thank you. You know, I think we have time for one last question, and it just seems like all these questions have rolled beautifully one on another. And this is from Dr. Nainka George, who's a wonderful veterinarian, works in our research programs here. How do you personally take care of your wellness while you stay patient, engaged, and committed to seeing the changes you seek to create in our society?
Okay, so I'm gonna preempt my answer by telling you that my wife's not here, so I can say anything I want, and just don't call her, because she'll tell you that I don't follow my own advice. Look, it's real simple for me. You can't take care of others if you can't, if you're in need yourself. If you really want to, if you're really service oriented, then it starts with taking care of yourself. You know, the best analogy is that a sports athlete understands that they have to prepare for the next game, that they have to go through certain routines in order to improve. I don't understand why medical professionals can't figure that out.
Physician, heal thyself.
Yeah.
We are at the top of the hour. This has just been amazing. Thank you so much. There's a comment here at the end, not until 1949. Let's not forget Alfreda Johnson Webb graduated from Tuskegee, and Jane Hinton from the Penn. So we've got the ladies who followed many years later, before they got their opportunity, and those pioneers, those amazing pioneers came along. And Phil, you are an amazing pioneer. We're so glad to have you as our Alumni of the Year. So grateful for this talk.
Well, I just wish I could have seen all of you all in person.
We'll do that. We'll get you out here when it's safe, when we can. We'll call it a day there. I'm gonna.
Hey, Phil.
Hi,
Here we
Ron.
go. If anybody wants to share a word with Phil, this is a good time to do it.
Guys, Phil was my professor there at Tuskegee, taught me cardiology way back. And Phil, up to this day, when a cardiology drug comes across fire out or whatever, somehow your name and your energy from that class still runs through us.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I just have visions of you because you were so much fun to have as a professor there, going way back 30-something years ago. And I must share with you also how you impacted me and everything else. And then I had a graduate student who's now working for you, so that's part of the whole network of keeping things moving along. So
Circle of life.
thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Great.
All right, Phil.
Yes.
Thanks. I don't know if anybody else wants to speak up here. I know you've got a lot of probably old friends on this call.
Yeah, I'm looking at them.
Yeah.
Oh, you're around a golf, man.
Yes, you do.
I think you know Dr. Liara Gonzalez. She's one of our slightly younger professors.
Yes, I know. Hi. I see Sue's on here too.
Tom Carnegie. I mean, waiting for Sue to say something because I know you must have worked together.
Hi, Phil.
Yes.
Great
Hi,
to see
Sue.
you.
How are you?
Just fine, thank you. Still passionate about immunology.
I can vouch for that.
Well, that's great. That is great.
Okay,
It's
Phil.
it's good to see all your faces. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. I think we're going to fold it up. I'm going to give you a quick call on the phone. I just need.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Thanks so much.